Tonight's been one of those nights, but it's about to be a good one because I'm back with my normal crew here. And Evan, you had a very important topic you wanted to hit, so I'm going to give you the first 10 minutes. If you don't have some visuals, I can obviously pull up the players' profiles. But I thought it was a very important topic because you're the head expert when it comes to Dynasty. That's kind of been the world that you've lived in for a long time. And I keep hearing about with the fall off of traditional DFS and the reemergence of like different fantasy games, but then people leaning into the sports book. The one industry that's like thriving right now kind of came back out of nowhere is Dynasty football. So I'm like, you know what? Let me ask you specifically, like, why you still do it, what makes it fun for you, kind of the inside baseball look at Dynasty, but then like, why do you think there's such a resurgence of it on YouTube? Because apparently it's like a really trendy thing right now, and I'm like, I also kind of know that you're not a YouTube guy. You're not watching a ton of podcasts, so like you're not biased by that opinion. So I just want to know why you think the modern NFL guy kind of lends itself to Dynasty, if you even think it's true. Maybe you think it's total nonsense. I don't know.
There's definitely some truth to that, and at the risk of sounding like repeating an answer I've said in the past, what I like the most about the Dynasty format is that it's the closest you're getting to being a real life NFL GM on a fantasy football level. I don't know if I can make this just a teensy bit wider here. It's kind of better. Okay. Hoping that's not too complicated for the viewers. What we're looking at right now is that I am in the middle of a Dynasty startup draft. Thanks to shout out to the football guys for inviting me into this particular league. A lot of Dynasty leagues these days, especially the startups, like to play with a format that you don't see in your traditional fantasy football formats. You start off with one quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, varying flex spots. In this case, wide receiver, running back, tight end. We have three of them here. I forgot to mention the tight end, and then the super flex spot. Super flex just adds quarterback to your typical wide receiver, running back, tight end. I look at it personally like it's an optional two quarterback league at that point where you don't necessarily have to play a quarterback in that spot, but 9 times out of 10, that's what you're going to be sticking in that slot anyways, your second quarterback. And as a result, quarterbacks are now much more valuable, as you can see by our draft board right here, how many quarterbacks went in the first round. Typical one quarterback leagues, you are not going to be picking all these quarterbacks very early on just because you're missing out on a lot of talent where there's a lot more value, such as wide receiver and running back. And this league also has a tight end premium, which is an extra half a point per catch for tight ends. So now you're seeing guys like Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta going in the third round much earlier, and Travis Kelce going in the sixth round just because he's older and doesn't have as long of dynasty value anymore. So right now we are in the seventh round. We turned off the clock for tonight just because it's a slow draft. Slow drafts just take as much as the commissioner wants. During the daytime, while we're all awake, the commissioner puts it on 8 hours, so you have time to make a pick. That allows people, at least with day jobs and other commitments, to come back to it when they get a chance and then make their pick. I'll shut up for a bit if you guys have any comments.
No, I personally am not a fan of slow drafts. But like I've done a few a year, usually for a couple different leagues I'm in. My guillotine league is a slow draft every year. As a matter of fact, it usually starts sometime in July so that we have a full month or plus before the season starts to finish the draft. So like I that's the thing. I'm getting to the point where with slow drafts, I will be starting drafting soon.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that one, Gov. I do not like slow drafts either, just because I just like to knock it all out. Just, let's just
give me an hour and a half. Let's do it. 2 hours at the most. Like, we got this.
Yeah. I know that's easier said than done for some people. I mean, especially for those who have, longer hours in work and kids and wives and whatnot. But, yeah, I'm with you on that one. I definitely don't like slow drafts, but, I don't mind going out of my comfort zone and doing what I don't typically like just to change things up so that I have more to talk about with fantasy football. And the other thing I forgot to mention too, I do not like Superflex, as to me, it's it's in my philosophy with fantasy football leagues, especially with the ones that I run, either be a 2 quarterback league or don't be. And the reason I say that is because the top 20 quarterbacks are the ones that are worth starting in your traditional fantasy football league every year, and the remaining 12 are dart throws. So when there are not that many quarterbacks to go around, I don't like putting that much value on one position. But lately, I don't have a firm answer on why that's a trend with a lot of dynasty leagues, but that's the way it goes. I don't run my dynasty league this way. I would personally hate it, but like I said, I want to go out of my comfort zone and what I don't typically like so that I have more to talk about. And then 13 bench spots as well, along with 4 taxi spots and 2 IR slots.
Evan, that's how we met though, because you had this love and passion for, for sports and for football specifically in this case, but you weren't afraid to venture off and try something new and adventurous. And that's why part of the reason I think that you wanted to join this podcast. I don't need to speak for you, but that was part of it. I thought, and then I saw the value because you thought so differently. I'm curious though, because when I thought about doing a dynasty league, or I wanted to dedicate more time to it, I thought kind of the same thing. If you're going to do a 2 quarterback league or this idea of a super flex, if I was going to run a league, I would want my own custom sliders essentially when it comes to just allocating my points. So if the idea is to make quarterbacks more valuable or put an emphasis on taking quarterbacks, right? I'm like, all you need to do is basically balance out the touchdown to interception, ratio when it comes to penalties. Like, so basically, if you want to make like Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, less or more of a value, you just tinker with that interception to touchdown, threshold, and there you go. But a lot of people decided to go with the 2 quarterback system. I just never understood why that was always the go-to. Like, not saying it shouldn't be an option or it's not a fun mode. I'm just like, why hasn't anyone ever just thought, I'm going to make my own custom points essentially and made each position more valuable that way?
Well, and that's a part of what makes tight end premium more intriguing as well, because in years ago, we didn't have as many great pass catching tight ends as we do right now. So tight end premium is definitely going to be even more valuable in today's NFL compared to like 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just another way to try and balance things out to add more value to that position. And I mean, fantasy football is always going to change with the times, with the way the NFL is played. So you have all of that. And going through 7 rounds right now, I'll highlight the picks that I made. There are a lot of people who traded some of their startup draft picks to either move up or move down, depending on what guys they want. I personally don't like to mess around with that sort of thing. I just prefer to get my team together just based on wherever it lies, as long as I get a good value pick out of a certain tier, and then just get my team set up and then worry about making moves from there. It's only June, so this, there's still a lot on the table that we don't know yet. And I ended up picking Jaden Reed with my last pick as my second wide receiver, because otherwise Deebo Samuel was the next available wide receiver, and I didn't want to grab Deebo, A, being an older wide receiver. I think he's only like 28, though. B, he's also a 49er along with Ayuk, and I don't want both starting wide receivers for the 49ers. And 3, I don't know what's going to happen after this year with the 49ers wide receiver room. Is Ayuk going to go? Is Deebo going to go? Are both going to go? And I don't know, regardless of where Deebo goes, I don't know if he still has the same fantasy value on another team. So,
I do have a question about that, though, because I know you said you could trade picks. Can you only trade your first pick?
No, you can trade as many of these startup picks as you want, as well as future rookie draft picks.
So I know you said you don't tinker with it, but why not just trade out of that pick if that's your scenario?
I don't feel I have a reason to trade out of any of my picks at this time. I could change my mind later if in these later rounds here, because we have 28 total rounds. And if there's a guy I really like toward the last 8 rounds, I may start making some offers. But right now, I don't have a strong preference with the top tiers. I'm just going to grab the guys that I like wherever's available to me. I'm not married to player names, and then just go from there.
I'm with Donnie. I'm thinking about it the other way. Like if you were just took Jaden Reed because you didn't want to take Debo or Godwin or any of the other wide receivers on the board. That's where I would have seen if someone would have like traded you their pick later, like 5 picks later, and a pick and a rookie pick next year or something, or one of their other picks later in the draft, just to move up, just acquire assets. Like I would have been looking at stuff like that, especially if there's not a guy you immediately want to take it at your pick. Like even now, I get why you haven't been doing it, and it makes perfect sense to me. But like once you get like round 12, if you can turn your round 12 pick into 2 round 15 picks, do it.
Yeah.
Or a later round 12 and a round 17, like do that. Stuff like that would be the thing I'd be looking to do in the draft now. Because you've got a good core right now. Like you probably need one more wide receiver, so maybe 3 or 4 more rounds of just getting the guys you want for your team, but then just start acquiring assets so you can get everyone else who's available.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally hear what you're both saying as well. There's just the thing is that I'm just not, like I said, I'm not married to any particular player name like in a later round. So to me, it's like I'm not that picky early on. So to me, it's like, well, I can live with just sticking with where I'm at right now because it's a startup league and I don't feel there's any emergency for my team. And like you said, the good core is there. There are some question marks around guys like Joe Burrow and TJ Hawkinson with their injuries, but
If
got to risk it for the biscuit, right?
Solid. Yeah, exactly. And like you have him and Dak, so like just because of the injury risk, I would definitely consider getting another quarterback. But like that's just construction of 28 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, and right now there are at least a few quarterbacks left on the board that I'm not going to particularly reach for, but at least I know they're there, depending on who's left over, because I've already got 2. I definitely will need to grab a 3rd and maybe a 4th if I'm feeling frisky, but yeah, for as of right now, I'm pretty happy with the picks that I've got, and we'll just have to see how this goes as folks continue to make picks and trade picks.
I do like the game theory discussion you're having, Evan. If I could just steer a little bit more, just from a different angle, because I'm like, again, I kind of mentioned it at the top. Why do you think it's so popular right now? Because like best ball, for example, I think best ball and this have a relationship, but at least I can understand why best ball is more popular than like daily, because there's no roster management. So even like, say Donnie wanted to take like Lamar Jackson in daily fantasy, but Lamar Jackson was questionable. That changes his value, his DFS salary, and then the injury risk. He's got to check on his phone on Sunday morning or Saturday, evening. He's got to make an appointment to, check.
Yeah.
Where best ball, there's no roster management. So like, Gov talked about it. You get in, get out within an hour. So it's appealing. Now, you hear the old trope, especially in the 90s, because we're old men. Donnie's a bit younger, where it's like, oh, stop talking about your fantasy football team, bro. I like sports, and I'll listen to a sports podcast, but I don't want to hear about one person's specific, dynasty league. But then the minutia of a dynasty league, like the ins and outs, making the trades, these deeper dive kind of philosophies are what makes it interesting for me. So why do you think it's like so popular right now, or at least gaining traction in terms of a watchable product for content?
Well, as far as Dynasty goes, I would say it's just because it's a niche game for traditional fantasy football where if you use a resource like a Football Guys, for example, for your for like strategy and planning for your redraft leagues, whether it's the draft or in-season moves or late season moves for a championship run, you might have seen articles on the website or at least other people in the community talking about Dynasty, and I wouldn't say it's taken off super popular yet, at least compared to your traditional redraft leagues. But compared to when I started doing it 7 years ago, there's a lot more people playing it now and getting crazy with specific slots and specific scoring systems, even more now with tight end premium, like I said, and super flex slots. But I look at your traditional fantasy football leagues like with redraft and keeper and dynasty. it's on the same world as DFS and best ball, but it's in like a different country, if that makes sense for those particular games. Because best ball to me is just they call it season long in the industry. And to me, it's just DFS, but it's just for the whole season. There's no roster management, and it's just basically building a DFS lineup, but it just lasts the whole season. There's no roster management. Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then DFS, you're just drafting a new team every week. And that's why I say I look at it like it's in a whole different continent and country compared to just your traditional fantasy football games, which I come from.
So, Evan, I'm curious, and would you watch Dynasty content? Like, let's say me and Donnie had a Dynasty league, and we were going to build a podcast specifically around it. Like, what are some of the things that you would look for as a fan of it, as a person who's familiar? And then, like, do you think it would work? Because apparently it's gaining traction, but I haven't seen a ton of people do it yet, but I have started to see an uptick in the video. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, so based on what I've observed from most Dynasty, or not just Dynasty, fantasy football analysts in general, a lot of them will tell you that Dynasty articles don't tend to bring the clicks and the money. So depending on the platform they're writing for, they're not as inclined to write about Dynasty compared to Best Ball or DFS or just your traditional redraft league. So finding Dynasty articles is, like I said, it's a niche format that there will be plenty of writers that'll take that leap to try and at least be different and get attention that way. And the vast majority of articles, especially at this time of year, are going to be like lists of like top 7 or top 8 guys to trade for right now, which rookies to avoid and that sort of thing. And then they'll give, and then guys like, I don't know if I'll do any more name drops, but you'll at least find from some of the more knowledgeable people, more or less justification on why like a Jordan Addison doesn't have good numbers and why you shouldn't chase him above ADP in any Dynasty startup or any other format. So that's going to be the type of content that you're looking at in Dynasty at this time of year, if outside of the rookies.
Well, we're going to get to some of the NBA offseason news, but let's say like an NBA player gets traded. I liked your analysis there because I think you're kind of right. So if an NBA player got traded, in this case it was Murray, got traded from the Hawks today, Donnie could have the same opinion as a very well-off general manager of the NBA about Murray's evaluation. Like his ranking could be similar to an actual pro scout or the actual coach himself. But there is some credibility when you know that, hey, this guy really cares about this, this dedicated version of what I love. There is some like, he's willing to deep dive, Dylan Lau on the Raiders. He's willing to know all these rookies. He's willing to watch like late night, MAC football. So therefore, I can trust his information. I do think there is some kind of like badge of honor that comes with a Dynasty podcast. So like, yes, it is for the nerd of football, if you will. But like, because information is so hard to trust these days, I do think when you are doing a startup league and you gain that credibility and that gateway, it does help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually had to look up that trade that you were talking about as well, whereas I don't even recognize the names anymore because I don't follow the NBA. But I didn't know if you had a question pertaining to that point you just made as well.
No, I'm basically agreeing with you. I think it's an information thing. It's like, because there's like, for example, DFS has so many podcasts out there. You could type in DFS week 1 and there's so many people. The market is oversaturated.
Yeah, and that's inevitable when you have more and more states legalizing platforms like DraftKings and FanDuel, where now the gambling is considered legal. So now you have a lot of these Johnny-come-latelys coming in and starting their DFS podcasts or primer articles or whatever. So,
right. So, but that's my point is if you can find someone that makes Dynasty interesting to you, but you're also like, well, if he's in a Dynasty, he also knows what he's talking about, because there's a commitment level that comes with it. It's like, he's not just saying that this, Tua is good, week 2 against the Jets because, whatever reason. He's saying, no, I think Tua is good for, the remainder of the season. And so there's some agency to that, I feel like.
It's a long-term investment in the talent that the player brings to the table.
Mhm.
And that can be limited based on the team they have around them. Like Garrett Wilson pissed off a lot of people last year because the quarterback depth behind Aaron Rodgers was absolute garbage. And the passing offense just wasn't there because Robert Saleh is a defensive coach and not an offensive coach. So that Jets offense sucked. And I don't think a lot of people are recognizing that who drafted Garrett Wilson last year in like your redraft leagues or any shareholders in Dynasty, and they want to get off of him because, oh my God, he's a Jet. That means I can't trust him. But that can change year to year as well, which is why in Dynasty, you have to care about the talent that they bring to the table based off of rankings and tiers and just whatever weighted system you find that is close enough to accurate as on whatever Dynasty value calculator you can find.
Did you guys have any questions?
No, I'm good on this. I've always been terrible with any fantasy football league. So Dynasty is way over my head.
I'm curious.
Dynasty's not really over my head. Like, it makes sense. Like, if you're doing Dynasty, you are someone who's put a lot more into it. You're not thinking like I get what Logan's saying. You're not thinking about it week to week or even like one season. Like, you're putting a whole lot of depth into all these players, into the rookies you're going to draft the next year. So, like, it's a lot more of in-depth knowledge into the sport and everything than you might be on, like, your casual DFS player. But, like, this reminds me a lot of, like, playing my Madden leagues, where it's like, of course I'm going to play a Madden league 20 years in the future. Like, I'll just do that.
See, again, that kind of points out, I understand why people like Dynasty as like a personal agency thing of like, this is my team. This is what I chose to do. These are the trades I decided to make. Like, I think Donnie's point was, hey, if I end up having the number one pick in a fantasy draft, even if it's best ball, it's like Christian McCaffrey is almost like, the expected value for Christian McCaffrey at 1 is so high that you almost feel like you have to take him. Where in this, it's like you could trade down. So, like, the optionality of a Dynasty League is so appealing from an individual standpoint. But it's almost like I said earlier, it's like where no one really wants to know the minutia details of, like, how your team is doing. It's like, I would rather play the sport, but I don't necessarily want to watch it. So that's what's interesting about why the content to me is becoming so much, even doing mock drafts, like, when I heard about Dynasty, it was like only for the hardcores. It was for the really, and it probably still is, but like that's why I'm interested, because I can tell Donnie, for example, is not interested at all. So like,
well, no, I'm interested in it. It's just I know that it's just not my thing. Like I know I'm not good at it.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you then, like, why do you think it's so popular? Because I feel like we have good contrast here. Because Evan's he's almost like a commissioner. He's an experienced vet in the room. So, like, why do you think it's popular, given that you have no interest in it still?
I mean, as a society, we like continuity. This gives a lot of continuity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and not having all this change is a lot of people like. So I get it. I mean, I like having my own personal. I think what it is a lot of these Dynasty leagues are like big money entries, and I'm just not. That's what makes me not interested.
That's a fair point, though.
Yeah, and my Dynasty leagues that I run, which is not this one, I always keep the entrance fee at just $30 for my Dynasty league, because otherwise you start to scare off people with the bad teams that are rebuilding year to year, because you're asking a lot, especially if they are not quite championship caliber and maybe they want to build through the draft and they want to try and, if they end up in the consolation bracket and they have to try and win that to win the number one overall pick for the rookie draft, yeah.
Yeah, but see, for Evan, for me, that's still like, to start out, that's too much for me. Like 30, maybe at one point in my life it won't be, but right now it's not even that I don't have it. It's just like it's not worth the risk of losing $30.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, because you're sticking that in a pot that you're not sure that you're going to get back in the end of the year, and you're young, you're trying to get through school and whatnot. I get it. There's a lot of people who can't spare that, and that's totally fine. That's going to change, and That's why it's important at least to
I
have.
do think $30 is like reasonable. Like it's not
I know
$100
it's not,
league.
yeah.
It's not a $50 league, but like
But
That's what takes me away from Dynasty, though. I love Dynasty as an idea. It's just, for me, it's too rich for my blood right now that I'm not willing to risk.
no, I get it, Donnie. And I listened to this. I listened to this primarily betting podcast called Circles Off with Rob Pizzola, and he has interesting like betting people on with different philosophies and different angles. And they were talking, I think, at one of their last shows, one of the more recent shows, and he was talking to one of the sports bettors who's really good at NFL money lines. Excuse my phone, but he's really good at NFL money lines. And he was like, look, I would probably be really good at NFL futures, betting like win totals for the season. And I'd probably be very good at it. But the problem is, he said, let's assume that I think the Panthers win total is a good bet, right? And let's just assume, for the sake of argument, I don't think it was live, that the win total was like, 4 games or 6 games. He said, if I think that, the Panthers are better than that 6th game, it probably would be I'm going to win that bet more than I'm going to lose it if I can justify all my reasons. But the tie-in, that emotional investment of I have to leave a certain amount of money on my DraftKings account or in limbo for 5 extra weeks or 7 extra weeks or 10 extra weeks if
4 extra months.
Right. But that was his point. He was just trying to basically say like this duration of time, whatever it is.
No, and that makes perfect sense.
Right. And
like,
I think
I've also thought about it like a lot of my like season long leagues. I think about more like my pool league. Mm-hmm. Like I pay $10 a week to play pool. Mm-hmm. So like that can equate at the end of the pool session to like $150. Why would I not just like play in 2 or 3 different $50 season long leagues?
Exactly.
And I guess it seems like the same thing.
And God, that was kind of his point. Like if he believed in the Panthers, right? If he thought the Panthers would win over 4 games, why don't I just bet it? And this is what he found. He said, if I bet it week 1 through 4, I'm actually probably going to win more money because the money line's not going to be, it's going to be way lower than I think the Panthers win total is. And this way I get paid out right away. And if I hit on week 1, then I can reinvest in week 2 at a bigger price pool or at a bigger price than I would have had otherwise. Where Donnie has to basically decide, like, is this $30 league worth my time? Because it's not just for this weekend. It's not just the 4th of July, the biggest, draft weekend of the year for fantasy football. I got to invest all this time into knowing all these players as well. Which means
I don't know a ton of leagues that draft on 4th of July weekend either because that's super early. Like the last week of August going into Labor Day weekend is when a lot of people like to have their drafts.
Maybe that's a misconception of mine, Evan, and like maybe that's a blind spot. Is like I would assume with it being a dynasty league and such a deeper league, maybe with rookies and things like that, you'd want to get started earlier on your research, which would then push up the draft dates. But maybe I'm wrong on that.
I don't know if there's a popular weekend for rookie drafts in dynasty formats because from my experiences, they've been all over the place. The first ever dynasty league I was in typically like to have the rookie draft at the end of June, like right now at this time of year. I left that league in after the 2019 season. And my particular league, I've had the rookie draft for the last 3 or 4 seasons at the end of July. And mine is actually coming up in 30 days as well. I like to do it early enough just because A, we're going to have enough information on the rookies in training camps just before preseason. And B, I like to do it ahead of other people's commitments so that, August is when school's starting and August is also when other people's redraft leagues are going to start happening. So I like to get that out of the way.
I do have one more.
Sounds smart.
Go ahead, Gubby. You got something?
No, I'm saying that sounds smart to like to get it done like right there at the end of July. Because you're right. Like a lot of your people who are in a dynasty league may also play a normal season-long league with friends and family or somewhere else, and they would need to be drafting that during the month of August too.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's interesting to hear the different perspectives that we've got here of where do we like spending our money, and leading in a dynasty format. Of course, yeah, I'm not here to tell people how to spend their money, and I think it's at least interesting to bring up this particular topic in a whole different world compared to everybody else here on a DFS podcast, where you're just thinking short term, week to week, give me my money now, the type of thing. Where this is
yeah, that's like there's no, to be honest, like when I think about DFS and like that, it's like, yeah, and there's not really like a cash game dynasty versus a GPP dynasty that you can do, where like the cash games are more like consistent money every week. They're easier to win kind of games as opposed to the GPPs we play, whether they're single entry or multi-entry.
I think that's why Donnie favors daily, though, is like he can get in not only at any price point, but there's so many different contests. There's like showdowns. There's, you don't have the time to dedicate to a full league. You can literally just watch this Thursday night broadcast.
And
Like,
I have another, random dynasty thing, and I could be wrong, but I feel like if you win in dynasty, you almost have no incentive to just say, "Hey, I won," and cash out, and just say, "Hey, that was awesome,"
Mhm.
And
right.
I just, I'm sure I'm not, it's probably very rare for the same person to win like over and over again, or at least keep breaking even.
It's very hard to win back-to-back championships in Dynasty. I have only seen that once in my league in 2020 and 2021. This particular guy was actually a bit bullish on joining my league at first, in the first place, where he was thinking just like you, Donnie, where $30 was a bit tight because he's a teacher, he's on a teacher's salary. He had a girlfriend that he was going to get engaged to at some point. So yeah, $30 was a little tight for him. But, they go figure he wins the first 2 seasons of our league, and now he's hooked. So I'm happy with being able to retain a lot of guys.
That's the thing. Like you do. I feel like it's the thing. You get hooked on it.
And as being a dynasty, I don't know. I guess not dynasty expert, but at least a dynasty enthusiast, we'll say. My dream is just to get more people converted to that format as well. But telling it to a bunch of DFS folks is a lot harder said than done.
Well, I would be open to a dynasty league, so I think you're speaking to a crowd that is open to the idea. And like DFS has kind of flirted with it. Best Ball, I feel like, was a flirtation with, hey, let's play this game but do it differently.
Best Ball to me is just your typical redraft league, but just you don't manage your team. You just draft a team and hope it does well. You're trying to win your league at the draft, which is exactly the opposite of what you do in your traditional league,
Right.
where you got to make moves, you got to drop people, add people, trade people. I mean, it's still possible to win without trading if you're lucky, but yeah,
you still got to get a couple of good free agent spots. You got to make sure you're playing like, and you might have to get lucky once or twice. Like I know I should play this guy who's normally on my bench, even though it's not like a bye week where I need to play him. I'm going to play him as my third wide receiver instead of my normal guy that week. Like you kind of got to get that feeling or something.
And emotionally, I don't like uniformity. So like I love the idea of a dynasty league because it gives you so many options. You can trade. If I have the first pick, I can say, no, I don't want Christian McCaffrey. I want Jamar Chase, as my wide receiver. I don't need to take him at 1. I can trade down. So I'm open to that format. I think when DFS first started, they wanted to be so different. They wanted to be the trailblazer. Like, you don't got to draft. That's it. Your grandpa drafts. He's a nerd. He's on his computer in the basement. He's like reading all these like informational things. He's looking at models, and it's just funny because like that was kind of their big selling point. Of like the real football fans can watch the game and translate quickly. It's like daily. It's like instantaneous. And now it's like funny because DFS is so analytically driven. It's so like models. It's projections. It's like, look at my content.
Yeah, that's the dynasty. That's the dynasty format as well. You have a lot of the similar articles as well, where the data is king in this game, and people gobble it up because they just want to try to get that leg up advantage on their opponents. Even though there's still the luck factor that a lot of people don't want to admit.
Well, I have one question for you because I think it's an important one because like we talked about best ball, or we talked about like, even DFS. You talked, how is Evan going to make his first selection in a DFS lineup? Because if he picks that 7K, wide receiver, he then puts a restraint on Donnie, who then picks a running back. Like that salary kind of limits your upside. It kind of locks you into different tiers. So like there is something there. When we're watching a best ball, it's like instantaneous. It's high traffic. Oh, who goes first? Who goes second? Who goes in the top 10? Like there's some relatability there, because it's like, well, in my league, Justin Jefferson went 2. In your league, he goes 5. So people are curious to know.
But on the flip side, I use that on the flip side though when I'm in my season long, because like normally like that guy we have done the research on and is 4,500 at wide receiver, and we want to play him as the value, and he's under owned, is also probably available in a lot of normal season long redraft leagues, and maybe even sitting on your bench in a dynasty league or something. It's like, maybe this is, like I said, maybe it's the week you take the shot on that guy, because we're trying to take a shot on in that single week DFS. He's cheap. He's under owned. He's also available and not being played in season long. Like, those are two things that I've seen correlate. It's like I won some season long leagues picking up a dude and playing him like 3 weeks in a row, and he gets solid points, good points, solid points. And you see in DFS, he's 45, 55, 6,000.
Right.
I'm going to have to get used to the NFL prices again in DraftKings. I'm so used to the UFL ones.
Oh, wow.
That's a good point, though, because, like, let's just use our UFL example. It's like Durant, we were right on him, right? And it was an information chase game. We had heard he was going to be the starter. DraftKings couldn't adjust. Like, he was already this certain price. So then it's just like, how can we fit it in? And that became the kind of fun game of it. But to your point on Dynasty, it's like if Evan's really high on Ramadunze, for example, and he thinks he's going to do really well, he's only got to take him one time in a league. And he owns that whole upside. His value doesn't change. He's either right about that pick or he's wrong. And he has to wear that every week. So it feels good when you're right all the time. Like you want to feel good. So I get it. But I'm saying, like, if Dynasty is so popular to watch as a content vehicle at this point, Evan, how do you make like week 4 interesting for me and Gov? Or how do you like wake Donnie up after this terrible discussion having to talk about that? Like, how do you get a guy to still care? Because I understand why the draft is an interesting element to watch in a Dynasty league. It's like, I want to watch 26 rounds of a guy go deep dive, who he thinks the sleepers are. But how do you get people to watch week 5 and week 6?
So once you start getting in the middle of the season, like week 4, week 5, where it's still not super early on, but at least the season's finally kicked off, articles and other content on like YouTube and whatever are going to be similar to your typical redraft leagues. They're going to start talking about guys who are probably on the waivers or the free agent list in your league, depending on how big your rosters are in Dynasty,
upside guys
that you need to grab.
Yeah.
And you're not typically getting a lot of like in-season recommendations for Dynasty because it's a long-term investment, and there's not typically a lot of guys that you want to get out of that you don't want to be holding that bag toward the end of the season. That's more of a redraft worry in the first place. Whereas Dynasty is going to be like, what RB3 on a team's depth chart is worth picking up because the first 2 guys got hurt.
And how do you make that? Because you're right. I think that's the most interesting part is like when I'm watching like content on best ball, or not best ball, like there's some high stakes season long, right? Leagues I'll watch. And their waiver wire discussions, because they'll do like a waiver wire discussion show every week, and they're arguing who they should pick up at like tight end, for example, because that's a position that you interchange a lot in these. But we're talking like big, high dollar amounts, so it's a big weighted emotional decision for them. So how do you make that decision in a dynasty league? Because I do think that's the emotional appeal to appeal to an audience.
Well, so I think it also depends on what stage your league is in at the moment. And I'll give you an example. My Dynasty League, the one we're not looking at right now, started in the year 2020. I just got out of another Dynasty League that I was unhappy with, and I decided to start my own. We had the startup draft, and I saw that season that the Jacksonville backfield was very murky at best because they didn't have Leonard Fournette anymore. So they ended up having guys like Chris Thompson and guys whose names I forgot, and then a wonderful, shiny new rookie out of Illinois State, James Robinson. So I got James Robinson for free on the free agency because I wanted to lock up the Jacksonville backfield. It's typically considered a good form in a dynasty league to lock up as many useful backfield pieces as possible, running backs on a team, because one guy gets hurt, next guy steps up. You've got a running backs that you like in a system that's good at blocking for the run. James Robinson was that lottery ticket piece that nobody expected to have that amazing 1,000-yard season. Unfortunately, he never repeated that season, but he was at least a good sell piece after it all fell apart and Jacksonville basically got him injured. So that's an example of just I don't think you're going to find a lot of dynasty articles that will predict as such either, but that's at least a side example of what you typically want to do in a dynasty league. In this league, I don't know if I'll be doing that either, but I'll be looking later on.
Go, I think that's like a big difference with DFS too. It's like they almost appeal. The appeal is almost the opposite. It's like, oh, if I'm wrong week 1, week 2 is totally different. I'm not married to Odell. I'm not, but if I'm right about it, then I can quickly cash out. I can take my $1 million and I can brag about that story my whole life. But then if that story doesn't work out, it's like, oh, the guys at the bar, my colleagues at the water cooler, they never have to hear about that. So it's like that quick turnaround. I feel like for DFS, it's so appealing. It's like you can forget that you burned yourself in week 1 because week 2 is a perfect burn ointment in this analogy for DFS, where it's like, to Evan's point, it's like you have to be so far ahead of the bag. And I do think that's kind of the fun element. It's not just, hey, I want to win Dynasty this year. It's, I want to set myself up for the next 5 years. Or it's being transparently honest about where you are. It's like, in year 3 of this Dynasty League, I was one of the best teams. For me to be good in like a couple of years, I might have to take a couple sacrifices. And so that kind of discussion is interesting to me. It's like, when do you make that decision?
Common? Like, is tanking at any points common in your Dynasty leagues?
So every
not
dynasty
tanking, but dropping talent for just obvious, future progression.
Yeah, you're not typically going to see guys like dropping starter-worthy talent because that's considered a no-no. As that's considered like a bad form that could get you possibly kicked out. But yeah, I mean, you might see guys like trading away like solid pieces for draft picks, and tanking. It depends on the dynasty league and how they want to handle tanking. The way I handle it is that if you end up in the consolation bracket, you need to win that consolation bracket in order to win the number 1 pick. So you can't just suck your way to the first pick. Pause. So in that case, that's the way I handle it. And to Logan's point too, 5 years might be looking a bit far out for your typical dynasty league. It's usually 3 years at a time that you handle it, because you can trade draft picks between 2025, 2026, and 2027 starting this year. You get picks that are like 3 years out. So it's 3 years at a time. You don't typically get to do 5. I hope that covered everything. I don't know if you guys had other questions too.
I do have one little quick follow-up on that, because I did kind of have the same question. At what point do you like consider, hey, this blockbuster trade makes sense, versus like, when do you say like, okay, I understand your logic and your theory behind this, but I'm still not going to allow you to make that trade, because there has to be some integrity for you to at least have some skin in the game for this season.
Yeah, and lopsided trades are going to happen. There's just no way around it. Even in your traditional redraft leagues, that's going to happen too.
Yeah.
both teams have to think that what they're getting makes sense. And I mean, you see this a lot in your traditional leagues where a lot of guys won't trade unless they feel like they're winning the trade, meaning that they want to screw over the other team with talent, thinking that that's going to be their advantage. I've always hated that mindset because it's just not fucking true, because it's just not how the game works. But in Dynasty, you know, you're going to have guys that may want to start rebuilding their team, so they're going to sell assets for picks.
Right.
And so on and so forth. So, and like I said, the lopsided the lopsided trades are going to happen. So as long as it's not something stupid like Justin Jefferson for Justin Tucker, you can let the vast, like over 90% of trades slide.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Danny. I think that was kind of your point, is how often do you see that blockbuster trade happen so you can basically gut your team?
I was more so looking for, like, you know, I know you're not going to trade Justin Jefferson in a tanking asset thing. I more so meant, like, you know, the older veteran that, you know, in 2-3 years he probably won't be your guy, so you get rid of him now and get your assets somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've done that with plenty of wide receivers. Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, like those are two examples of wide receivers I've traded away when they hit age 30 or 8 or 9 years experience, whichever comes first. And that way I can either get a younger wide receiver and a pick, or I could send a lower pick with the wide receiver to get a young guy. And I'll give you an example of a trade that I did actually on, what was it? Was it actually June 24th? Yeah, it was. Wow. I didn't. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's June 17th. Yeah. 11 days ago, I traded Deebo Samuel, the number 9 pick in this year's draft in the first round, and I got back Garrett Wilson. So I got off the Deebo train, and I at least got back a young stud wide receiver who should be a tier 1 or 2 guy for years to come.
Yeah, see, but if it was mid-season, would you make a deal like that?
You absolutely can, yeah.
No, but would you? Does it depend on if you have a good chance of winning that season? Like,
so, I mean, if I'm looking to win now, probably not. The stupid vague answer is that it always depends on the league and who's in it that makes it worth your while, because everybody's for sale for the right offer, right? So for example, I have Cooper Kupp. He's 31 years old. He's got 7 years experience in the league. He doesn't appear to be slowing down, and I'm not in a hurry to get rid of a Cooper Kupp at his older age. But if I get that right offer in the middle of the season, and it's going to help me push for a championship, because that's where I'm at right now, I'll do it.
I'll be honest, one of the content creations I've kind of flirted with, and maybe like if we got big enough and I had the time to do it, it'd be one of them. The idea though is basically where I get somebody on and we talk about their best bet and their worst bet, and we talk about the emotional, the uptick of that, or the roller coaster ride, because I do think like those kind of stories are fun and fascinating. And I think everyone's played in a league at this point where the one guy in the league tries to ruin it, right? He tries to make a dumb trade, or or you have that voting system when you're just like, wait, this trade trying to go through, or like you remember that one move that happened, the guy took a really smart like late round pick and it actually worked, and like, so whether you're on the right side or the wrong side, I think that storyline kind of threaded throughout your league kind of like carries on. At what point, Evan, do you decide, like, even though a guy wants his tank, like, let's just assume he did, like, he wanted just all kinds of picks for next year, do you step in at all? Is there ever a threshold where you're like, okay, I understand why you want to do this, but this is too much?
I have not seen that myself in the 7 years that I've been playing Dynasty. There is one guy in my main Dynasty league who loves selling all of his draft capital for established talent. Right. And that's his prerogative to do so if he wants to do it. I don't care if that's how people want to manage their team, as long as there's no obvious collusion happening.
Because like if I hired you to do like a side podcast for just your Dynasty League in general, and so each week you had to come up with concepts and different ways to promote it, one way I would listen to it is if you told me the inside stories of like why you think people make certain moves, or like the psychology behind why you think each owner is doing a specific move. And so that would be interesting to me, is like how well you could tank in a situation, or how well, like what does a championship team really look like from start to finish, and like to follow that journey. That's the kind of stuff I think is really cool and fascinating about Dynasty.
And even in Dynasty, no matter what collection of players you have on your team at any time in the season, it's always week to week. So there's just no way around it, just because that's how the game is played.
And
So yeah, it's similar to regular fantasy football and redraft leagues, where the championship is always going to be, does your collection of players beat the other collection of players on the other team? So that never changes. So yeah, and how you get there is just entirely up to you and what you feel like your style of building a championship team really is. And everybody's going to have a different opinion on that. Everybody values players differently. So yeah, I mean, as a commissioner of my league, I try to let that go. I try not to get too persnickety about the way people want to play.
See, and I love that, because say you're having a bad season, like a one-off season, your consolation prize or your consolation bracket can be so, like, it can have real stakes, right? Like if you're playing in a season-long league and you have a consolation, you're like, yeah, well, if it's not for money, if he's not doing a consolation for money, if there's no real purpose, I don't really care. And so you don't see the fallout in Dynasty, which is good. And I think that would keep someone interested into a Dynasty like podcast if you were to do it that way.
And I have a deeper philosophical approach to that point that you just made as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, $30 is a very low bar to set for an entry fee every year for my Dynasty League. The top prices are $130, which a lot of like big money type players are going to go, well, that's not enough money. I don't think I want to play in this. But this is a home league where I look at it like the money is there to keep you playing and to care. But at the same time, I don't want this to just solely be about the money. I want this to be something that keeps the 10 of us together and talking, so we have an excuse to stay in touch. And I never want the money to come between us. So
yeah, there's some truth to that too, because like when you're committed in a Dynasty league, clearly committed to player takes and player opinions and evaluation, you're also admitting to yourself, hey, these 10 guys, we're committed. We're a family. Like we're literally a team. You're creating a brotherhood. It's not a, week to week thing. It's not a season to season thing in terms of the actual NFL season. It's you're in it for the long term. And so there is some cool agency to that. Is there any other questions for Evan?
No, that's it for me.
I thought this was a really good show.
I didn't think I'd go this long.
I didn't either. I got distracted. I completely lost track of time. I got distracted when my mom got home.
I actually got I was going to do a longer. We'll get into that. I
was fully into it until right about 5 minutes ago when I got the SOS text. But it's all good.
If you got to go, that's fine too.
No. Everything should be good now, so we're good.
I was going to say, though, just my last kind of subtopic to this is, do you think that DFS is scared of Dynasty? Do you think other websites are considering doing more Dynasty content? Are they considering doing more basketball content? Like, how is the fantasy landscape as a gambling and
gambling has always been more of trying to compact it. Gambling's going to focus more on in game and doing it per quarter and betting that way. Then it's going to try to create a the best thing they've done for Dynasty would be the Rainmakers. Yeah. And even that they want you to re-up year to year. But I would love a Rainmakers where a card I got works for as long as that player plays for that team. That'd be perfect. I do think we're going to that's the only rule I take. As long as the player plays for that team, it doesn't matter if you have a 2022, a 2023. It's Garrett Wilson for the Jets. As long as he's a Jet, you don't need to get him a new card. You don't need to get a new card until he's on a new team. I do think we're going to get there. And that's a good point. I do think Rainmakers and Dynasty kind of have that kind of marriage. Well, we're starting to even see it with Underdog is considering a daily fantasy product. Apparently, they're considering maybe getting into the salary cap market, or a set like FanDuel's more leaning into, hey, instead of doing so much DFS, we're going to offer more props, or more boost for our prop market and our kind of sportsbook market. And so
it is interesting how all these different sites are trying to take on different angles, and that's what I love most about Dynasty is there's so many ways to play in this one league, but so many different iterations. Like you can be the guy that's chasing the championship in this season, or you can be the guy that's like, no, I want to acquire assets for the next season. So like, I don't know. I just love that. But what's the next evolution? Is it the kind of Rainmakers approach where it's like once you own that card, you can have it for the duration of your account's life? Because I love that concept, guys. I gotta say, I love that.
I'm not even saying the account's life, just literally like that player's time as like that player.
Right.
Like in real life, like Randy Moss, there's a Vikings Randy Moss and there's a New England Patriots Randy Moss, and they are not the same player, and they are not the one that played in Oakland.
No.
So like, having to have a different card for each.
Would you reinstate that card if they go back to the former team?
I would allow that actually. That would be something that I would allow if that crazy scenario happened where a dude
like
plays
Mecole
for a team.
Hardman.
Julius Peppers would count for the Carolina defense twice. Like, yes, I get yes.
Cam Newton,
yes. Like I get the scenario. I'd be fine with it happening. I don't think it would actually come into play that much because most of the guys you would want in Rainmakers aren't the guys who are going to play for their team, leave, and then come back.
I love that idea.
They're probably just going to play for that team and then leave and retire.
No, I love that idea, Gov, and really it reminds me so much of Dynasty, and Evan just talked about it. But it almost seems like, Don, you'd be more into what Gov was talking about, but you weren't that interested in Dynasty. Do you think that's
I'm more interested in Dynasty. Rainmakers,
not at all.
The one thing I want to make clear too, Logan, is that Dynasty is not really in competition with the DFS and best ball world. Like it's like the analogy I made earlier. DFS and best ball are like on a whole different continent and country compared to dynasty leagues, keeper leagues, and redraft leagues. It's just a whole different way to play the game altogether with their similarities versus what you do in the DraftKings and FanDuel world, where you set a lineup and then just let it go on a week-to-week basis or a season-long basis.
No, I think you're right, and they probably should be. But what I'm saying is more like DraftKings and FanDuel and Underdog. They all have this like a fantasy banner or this concept, but they're all competing for our dollars, right?
They're not. Sorry, I was going to say they're not. I should have said they're not competing with like Yahoo, ESPN, CBS on the traditional fantasy football platforms. Like they're doing. Those three are doing their own thing and just having their own format.
Right.
I didn't mean to cut you off though.
No, but at what point do you think like it would be wise for one of these competitors to invest in something that would be more creative and more fun for everyone to enjoy? Because like not even like maybe it's not Dynasty, but like DraftKings and FanDuel are always trying to find different avenues to get our dollar. They're trying to get different avenues to get us interested in their sport. I mean, DraftKings, for example, tried I think it's called the Pick Six, which is basically just underdogs over/under game selection. So they're all trying to like compete with each other. And how do I get Donnie to give me his dollar versus that seems to be how it is.
I think I know where you're going with that too, but I just don't think that those three platforms are going to be looking at a niche format like Dynasty and thinking this is what we need to do next because they're already making bank off of what they're doing right now.
That's the thing. I agree with like I said earlier, like they're looking at so many other avenues on like inward and quicker and bets mid-game and bets mid-quarter and stuff like that. And they're looking at Pick Six and like all the other stuff that's out there and trying to get it to you quicker. They're not worried. No one's monetized Dynasty in the way you're thinking, and no one's thinking about doing it because of the niche it is. Like it's kind of like best ball in that it's really a one time a year thing, but it's also very in depth. It's not the thing that like there's a big difference between I have $10 in my season long league that I'm going to keep track of and do transactions with.
Right.
as opposed to anything of I have $10 on DraftKings to do whatever, whether that's place bets or play DFS or whatever, or buy Rainmakers or whatever it might be. Yeah, like Evan's right. Completely different realms. Like it's apples to or it's not even apples to oranges. It's apples to potatoes. It's vegetables to fruit. It's not even as close as you might want it to be, just because they're both flip. It's basically just like, yes, this is a game about football and this is a game about football, but one is the DFS game we're playing. It is very like gambling oriented. There's Vegas numbers. There's a lot of projections behind it. There's a lot of research behind it, and all that research is behind Dynasty. But Dynasty has a lot more moves to make, and it is more like being a GM of a team as opposed to a guy who's just betting the props on the market.
Right.
Which is kind of what we're doing with DFS, is trying to build a line. Like, I know a lot of guys who, like, that's what they do. They try to build a lineup based off the best props in the market compared to the DFS salary.
And there's yet to be a Dynasty. And there's yet to be a Dynasty league where you win extra money for guessing correctly what color Gatorade gets poured on the winning card.
Well, I asked some of these questions rhetorically just to keep things moving, because like they kind of get floated in the universe, but I actually agree a lot. I think the reason that these things are celebrated as differences are because they are so uniquely their own. And I do think if you tried to merge that gap, it would actually be a bad thing. That's why, like, I'm just excited with the possibility of the internet being that, like, if this happens 20 years ago, the four of us wouldn't even be having this conversation. So, like, it's cool that you can have like so much different personalities and different ideas, but we're all merged around this idea of sports. And so next week we actually have a special guest, and he's going to talk more about the betting angles. That's what I like about this podcast, is we can take one core concept of sports and just have all these different interesting conversations off of it. Is there any other sidebar conversation?
I do have one question for Evan to close us out.
Go ahead.
What color Gatorade would you pour on the winner of your Dynasty League if you had to choose?
So that's a funny thing too, because the guys in my league, we all don't live in the same area. So if I had to pick, I would bring back Michael Jordan's favorite flavor, citrus cooler, and use that.
Okay, I feel like that was important.
But there is some cool, like there is actually some, I think, validity in that question, because you know the dynasty, you know your dynasty mate so much better than you would in a standard league. Like, you know, maybe where they live, you know, some of their, you know, more personal details. Like, there is that camaraderie and that connection, I think, is special.
Definitely. And
maybe I'm just a nerd. Maybe I like that stuff. But like, me and Donnie used to run leagues, and like part of running a league wasn't just the Madden game we played, you know, every week. It was like, hey, we get to hear about this guy's story. We get to hear him decompress his day. Like, there is some cool like agency to that kind of thing.
All I know is that I like that Donnie's lean going right now, looking like Michael Jackson's Thriller. That cover.
Well, we're gonna lean on out of here. I think we're done for the night. But like I said, we're gonna be back on Tuesday. You want to say good night to the people?
Have a good night, everybody.
Peace out, everyone.
By the way, thanks, Evan. I don't say that enough, but that was a good podcast. And you were one of the guys that could actually bring it. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everybody.